you seen my baby? Have y'all seen my baby? You know me. I was born in Louisa Lynn. I was born right here in Apalachicola. Y'all know my parents, Marguerite and Jacob Lynn. They came over from Germany in 1860. They came over and met on the boat, and they married right here in Apalachicola. Right away they had a child, my oldest brother Jacob Jr. Then they had the next one, John Jr. And then I came along. Then I had a little sister. Her name was Margaret. And we grew up right here on the river. My brothers would go hunting and fishing and go diving for oysters. And us girls, we play along the riverbank. And my brothers, they go over here to the tupelo trees and they get honey and bring it in. Mama would put it on some hot cakes. It was so good. And we all went to school right here, right over here in this little schoolhouse, my brothers and sisters and me. And then those timbermen came down from up north after the Civil War. And, you know, they worked over here at the sawmill, you know, the Coon sawmill. And my mama wasn't happy because all those boys was coming down marrying all the girls. And my mama was like, well, who are the boys going to marry? But I didn't care because I met Jack McAlvin. And he was just the sweetest boy ever. And we got married right away. I was 17, and we started a family right away. We had a family right over here next to my mom and daddy's house. And we had our first son, of course, Jack, named after his dad, Jack Jr. And then we had John. And then we tried again. We had a little girl, and she was stillborn. And so we tried again, and we had Sarah Lee, and she was a good little girl. And then we have Rose. And Rose was the most beautiful girl in the world. Blonde hair, blue eyes, just everybody just loved Rose. And just when the sun would come up there, Rose would be just smiling, just a picture perfect. And then we'd gone to church that day on the 7th of January, and I'd come back home and we were sitting on the porch. It was a beautiful day for January. I was sitting on the porch drinking tea with the neighbors and boys, and gone down to the river to watch the boats go by. There was so much things going back and forth. The sawmills, they built all these houses with all this wood they had. And they came running back. Mama, Rose is falling in the river. So I went running down as fast as I could to the river, and I looked out and I saw her blonde hair out there, and I jumped out and I swam out there to her, and I pulled her up and she hugged my neck and she said, Mama. And I took her with all my might and I pushed her towards shore because nobody else was coming. And so I went under. You know, these things, they weigh a lot when they're wet. And I came back up and I pushed her again. I saw her daddy come down. And so I went under and I came back up and I pushed her one more time. And I saw her daddy jump in, and then I went down. And I didn't come back up. But I was just wondering, did she make it? Have y'all seen her? Do you know if she still made it? If you see her, please send her to me. Tell her I got a favorite doll.
My name's George Rouge. Been laid away here since 1921, unfortunately, but my family came here from Germany. And being of intelligent and hard-working people, they soon discovered the advantages of canning oysters, which they did, and it profited us handsomely. We were quite well off, had a very large house down on Avenue B, and quite a few businesses, including real estate. I was able, fortunately, to spend time where I wanted to. We were in Scotland during World War I and decided that was a bad idea. We came back. Then we used to go to New York every winter and spend the winter there. I don't know why we chose the winter, but a great place to be. Until 1921, then I was not able to come back of my own volition after that. Had 6 children, 4 of whom survived, but that was typical in the days back then. All in all, I'd say we did quite well here. We love Apalachicola, and I like to come back when they let me.
Good evening. My name is Victoria Catanetti. I was born in 1833 as Victoria Silva in Sicily, which is an island off the southern coast of Italy. Sicily enjoys a very Mediterranean climate, so when I immigrated here in 1852, I saw many things that reminded me of home. This was a big shipping port, as my home was, and I saw plants like fig trees and olive trees that reminded me of home. Now, when I immigrated here in 1852, I met my husband Dominic. He was also an immigrant. He was born in 1820 in a city called Rovinja in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, or modern-day Croatia. He immigrated to this area in 1841, and when we met in 1852, we were married. Dominic was a ship's captain. He served in the Confederate Navy during the Civil War on a vessel called the CSS Spray, which operated out of nearby St. Mark's, just up the coast. After the war ended, he became a bar pilot, helping ships navigate through the shallow waters of Apalachicola Bay and into port safely. These ships would bring in a lot of manufactured goods and sometimes people, and they would offload those goods and then load raw materials such as lumber, tobacco, and other things to be transported onto the next port. Now, Dominic and I were not blessed with any children, but we did raise my nephew, Joseph Buzzett, as if he were our own son. Joseph was the son of my sister Anna, who settled in New Orleans with her first husband when she immigrated here around the same time I did. And after she divorced her first husband, Anna sent Joseph to live with us. Now, Joseph had a family of his own, and his son founded Buzzett Pharmacy, which was a fixture of downtown Apalachicola for many years. Well, I passed away in 1904 after a long illness. My funeral was held at St. Patrick's Catholic Church, where I was a faithful member of the congregation for the entire time I lived in Apalachicola. My husband Dominic followed me a year later in 1905 at the age of 85. We lived wonderful lives, and we were so pleased that our graves were placed here so we could watch over Broad Street, now called 6th Street, which is where our home was when we were alive in the city. Thank you so much for learning about our family history this evening.
Good evening. My name's Charlie Gaines. I'm a carpenter here in Apalachicola. I do carpentry, do a little fishing too, whatever it takes to make a living here in town. Me and my wife Civility, we came here from Georgia. At least I think she's my wife. It's kind of an odd story, and I'll tell it to you. We got married after the Civil War, and she had a son and a husband before the war. Her husband's name was Reuben Anthony, and he left and went off to fight in the war, and never came back. At the end of the war, no Reuben, no word, no letter, nothing. So everyone just assumed that he was dead. Wasn't that unusual at that time? You know, people just go off fighting the war and just disappeared. So here she was, a young widow with a small boy. She needed a husband, I needed a wife, so we got married. Eventually we moved down here to Apalachicola and made a life for ourselves. Pretty good life, if you ask me. But then, about 35 years later, our son, well, my stepson, whose name was Joseph Anthony, he got a letter. And it was from his father, Reuben. Joseph was thrilled to know that his father was still alive. He just was overjoyed. When he came and showed that letter to his mother, however, she wasn't too happy that her first husband was still around. She had assumed he was dead. Where had he been for 35 years without letting anyone know? Well, Joseph invited Reuben to come down and, spend some time with him. So Reuben came, and when he got here, I asked him, "Where have you been for 35 years? What have you been doing?" Well, he had just been roaming the countryside, selling patent medicine, and, that was his career. I was flabbergasted. Civility was appalled. Joseph was thrilled. And, you know, I can understand that, you know, finally getting to meet your father after all these years. So, I guess it was good for Joseph. Reuben came down here and lived with Joseph for the remainder of his life, which wasn't long. It was only less than a year before he died. And I guess it was good for Joseph to have his father here. And I guess it was good also that Reuben didn't come back after the war. Otherwise, I would have never married Civility, or whatever we did when you already have an existing husband. It's kind of weird, but I always think of her as my wife. I thank you for coming by to see me, and I hope you enjoy your tour of the cemetery.
Hi everyone, come over. Do you want to go to a party tonight? I'm having a party. I love to have parties. My name is Mary Eggbert Pullman. I was born in 1824 in Germany, and they brought me here to Apalachicola as a young child. Oh, I love it in Apalachicola. Well, anyhow, I got married to Charles Henry Pullman in 1850, and we had 5 daughters. Could you imagine 5 daughters? Well, anyhow, we owned the store on 48th and Water Street. We had a general store, and we sold pottery and dishes and tools for men, and it was a wonderful, wonderful business for us, especially with 5 daughters and what they need and want. Anyhow, poor Mr. Pullman died in 1867, and I was left with my daughters, but we still had the store. And you know what? We had loads of festivities all the time, and I did have a lot of gentlemen callers. Well, I died in 1906. I stayed with my daughter, and in 1906, I passed away, and she buried me the next day. Isn't that peculiar? Well, anyhow, I hope you come to my party, because I have lots of parties. Thank you.
Y'all may not know me, but you should. My name's George Snelgrove, and I used to be the constable of these here parts. Franklin County now has a sheriff. That used to be a constable in my day. Back in my day, I ruled the roost. I can tell you it was a troublesome county. Murders and moonshining and fighting like nobody's business. But you know what? I kept the law here, and I kept it good until 1938, 2 years after I took office. Went to visit my old buddy, Harmon Edwards. Y'all might know Harmon. He had the place down there on Water Street called the Blue Front Cafe. Let me tell you about that place. Back at the back, that's where the men folk, they came to have a drink or two, maybe play some cards. Well, Harmon and I were back at the back, and Harmon always carried a gun, because he was a proprietor in a tough town. And Harmon, he shot me here, and he shot me here, he shot me here, and he shot me in the back, and that's the one that did me in. Harmon got arrested, said it was self-defense because he used my gun. They found out that what Harmon did was he shot a hole in his own hat to make it look like I shot him. Nope, I didn't. Harmon ended up spending 20 years making friends in jail. Well, I made some friends here at the graveyard. Old family. I think he might have gotten the better of the deal, but it all worked out. Justice was served, and that's what I expect. Y'all come on back. Visit our lovely county where we treat you right, and hopefully you get a better deal than I did.
Hello, I'm Adolf Menke, and I was born in Germany in 1867 and immigrated to the U.S. as a young man and ended up down in Apalachicola where I met my wife Mary, and we married at the age of 22 and had 2 children. I worked in the local industries, in the seafood industry and also in the lumber industry. There was a very large lumber mill that built or manufactured railroad ties where Mill Pond currently is. And they shipped them all over the world, except we didn't have a railroad here, so we didn't have any in Appalachia. At any rate, I died of the fever at a very young age, passed away when I was only 26 in 1893. And my wife carried on.
Yes, I'm Mary Menke. I was a native of Apalachicola and lived here until 1954. I raised our 2 children, and our youngest was born the year that my husband passed away. Mary stayed here. Our oldest moved to Florida, South Florida, and then to Texas, and he's in the industry there. However, we stayed here, and I experienced the many changes in Appalachia from the Depression after the Civil War until the boom of the timber and the seafood industry. At one time, there were 5 timber mills here in Appalachia, and we not only shipped the shingles to the Northeast, but there were turpentine and naval stores for resin. There was, of course, also the seafood, not only the harvesting of the seafood, but the canneries. Many of the local other Germans were of the canning industry. Then, of course, the Greeks brought in the sponging. And as my husband said, we shipped outland of the railroad ties until 1903, when we built our first railroad here. And in 1907, we had a big celebration in April when the first railroad engine came to Apalachicola down on River Street. And again, I lived with my daughter here until 1954, when I died at the age of 87.
My name is Mary Chapman. I was born in 1810 in the Carolinas, and I was married when I was 19, but my first husband died, and so I came further south, and I met Dr. Alvin Chapman, who's a famous botanist, and I married him, and we moved here to Apalachicola. He was educated up north. He was born in Southampton, Massachusetts, so he was a Union sympathizer. He would provide this credible information to the Union Navy when they came ashore. I didn't care for that too much as a Southern lady, so I moved to Mariana with my daughter from my first husband and my granddaughters. But after the war, we reconciled, and we lived in this beautiful house here, which will soon be the Chapman House Museum. My husband wrote the flora of the southern states, and this is a first edition from 1860 of his book. He had 3 other editions after this, but he was really a very famous guy. And I'm Mary Chapman, and I was married to him.
I died at the young age of 42, but I was killed by my second wife. So I should not have died at the young age of 42, just a little older than Miss Gina standing over there. But nonetheless, here I am, and here's my grave. But I'm getting too far along. I can go back to the beginning. I was born in 1926 in South Carolina, near Aiken. Grew up working on a cotton plantation, hauling timber, traveled up to West Virginia, where I met a fine Christian woman named Isabella Rhodes. Isabella Rhodes and I got married when I was 21 years old. We had 5 beautiful children, 3 daughters. We had 2 sons, passed away at a very young age. In the fever in Charleston, South Carolina in 1858. We were so aggrieved, we got on a ship in Charleston and headed south. We went down the Atlantic coast, around the southern end of Florida, and came back up, and they let us off in Apalachicola. Well, Apalachicola was a big, busy port at the time, hauling a lot of cotton and a lot of timber, and that was right up my line of work. So I got work hauling cotton and timber. I was a drayman, drove a wagon. And I did that for about 5 years until 1863, when the Great Unpleasantness broke out. I joined up with the 2nd Cavalry in Florida, which many people don't know was a Union cavalry unit. I joined them because I knew slavery was wrong. I'd grown up on a plantation, and I knew it was wrong, and I would not fight for the South. I stayed until 1865, when I came back to Apalachicola, and I found that my dear wife Isabella had taken ill while I was gone, and there was no reason for her to be ill. She was never sick a day in her life. She was a strong woman, and she died less than a year after I came back in 1865. She was dead in 1866. And that was when Elizabeth showed up. And that woman, plying her female wiles, got me to marry her in less than a year after my wife died. And something must have been wrong. Everybody called her Liza. Her name was Liza. Nobody called her Elizabeth, called her Liza. Liza had pretensions to wealth. Liza knew I had a little property just over the hill on the creek. It was on high ground. It was good property, but not worth much. But less than a year and a half after we married, that witch had poisoned me to death to steal my property. But she did not, because my 3 daughters married well. Their graves are right here, right in here, where mine, actually mine was not here. That old witch buried me in the backyard. My daughters moved me over here. And she has haunted me since 1869. Someday I'm going to get her. Someday I will get that. She's behind that tree right there. You can see her. You can see her hiding behind that tree right now. She's after some other man. She's making googly eyes at some man right now.
Leander Miller here. Born in Maine, moved to Apalachicola when I was 3. My father was a harbor master. I grew up around the boats, wanted to be a steamboat captain. Unfortunately, 2 months after a brand new boat was commissioned, and I became my first captain's job. Nepotism does work out. My dad as a harbor master got me the job, and in 2 months on a brand new boat, boom! An explosion. My fingers. My face. But still, I enjoyed my time here in Apalachicola. It's a great place to live, running around the harbor. My father became the postmaster after the War of the Northern Aggression. You guys may know it by some other name, but we know the truth. It's a year after I died, and then my mother became the postmaster after the Civil War. Did I say that? Northern Aggression. Have a good evening, and thanks for coming. It's the Ghost Walk, 2019.